Hello, I'm setting up the stream. It looks like we've started. I'm just checking settings. I'll say here at the beginning that this is kind of a redo. I tried to stream this earlier and I had some technical difficulties. So I did change some settings and move some things, but I'm still not sure how stable the setup is. And that's the notification. If you heard that, that's the notification about check your mobile live dashboard. Yeah, and I can see that I'm live. Okay, so looks like we're in frame, so yeah, so I'll try and start. Okay, so this is part of the series of discussions on, the Astrotheology Discussion series. And we've currently been discussing the Celestial Code of Scripture book by John McHugh. And in today's, I'm just flipping some pages. In today's stream, I would like to discuss chapter 11, which is titled Jesus' Celestial Sea Walk, plus chapter 14, which is titled Saint Christopher in the Guise of Orion. Both of those chapters share some material and make use of the same constellations. So going back to chapter 11, this chapter has, and I think some of the chapters we've previously discussed had this, where there's a longer portion at the front where the author McHugh is discussing why or how the authors would have had access to or would have known of this celestial code. He uses the term Lumashi writing, the constellation writing. So he's just saying that whoever wrote these Gospels, they could have, as like in a Hellenistic Jewish culture or Hellenized Jewish people, fluent in Greek, they could have had access to this information. And there was a part that I wanted to read as an excerpt. So in this excerpt that I'll be reading, it's from chapter 11. And in this, I'll be reading what McHugh wrote, but then he is quoting other authors in history. So I'll try to make that clear. Okay, starting the excerpt. In chapter 1, we noted that the astronomer poet Hesiod reported that Orion was able to walk on water 7 centuries before Jesus strode across the Galilean Sea. Quote from Hesiod. Orion, the son of Uriale, the daughter of Minos and of Poseidon, and that there was given him as a gift the power of walking upon the waves of the sea as though upon land. Back to McHugh. As we saw in chapter 1, this fact was reiterated by Apollodorus in circa 50 BC. Poseidon bestowed on him, Orion, the power of striding across the sea. About 60 years before Jesus performed his sea walk miracle, the Roman poet Virgil wrote that, quote, Orion, when cleaving a path, he stalks on foot through the vast pools of mid-ocean, towers with his shoulders above the waves. And that quote, and roughly 2 decades prior to Jesus' sea walk, the Roman astronomer Gaius Julius Hyginus declared that, quote, Orion had the ability of running over the waves as if on land. And end the quotes. So you can see from, or hear from that portion, that McHugh is establishing that the constellation, and I have pre-prepared the drawing here. So this is the constellation Orion that I've drawn on this paper. So McHugh is pointing out that this constellation of Orion already had or was perceived to have this striding across the waters as well as on land, this trait. So then, how do we get to Orion, already understood to have this ability, being associated with Jesus? So I believe to get to that. So Jesus, when considered Christ means the anointed one. So I believe that that the author finds that through some of this Lumashi writing and wordplay, that there's an other figure or another name that means anointed one. So let me see. Okay, so I'll show some of the... Now, in this chapter, there are some terms that are used. They're used within the chapter, but there's no logograms given. So I do not have cards for those because they weren't given. But so I'll just read those parts. But they use this dingir, and then the term damu, and then mul and sukal. And all this together, dinger, damu, mul, sukal, is saying dingir means like the god or deity. And I believe that damu means like the holy child or like the son of a god. We also used that in the chapter where the nativity chapter, that same phrase was used. And then mul is constellation. Is this in frame? Sorry. Mul just means constellation. And sukal, and not given a logogram here, is where we have anointed one. And anointed one, Christ also means anointed one. So where they're getting that sukal part from, though, is... I'm reaching for something, excuse me. It's so good. Yeah, looks like the stream is still flowing. Okay, so I've used this sheet before, but if you didn't see it before, this is a table that you can find if you search for Babylonian star catalogs, or what is known as the Mul Apin. So if you search, you can probably find a similar table. So here, I don't know if this is a little bit worn, but I don't know if this is legible, but it says Mul Sipa Ziana. That's the Sumerian, and then it shows some logograms. And then in Akkadian, this particular table is suggesting Shitadaru or Shidalu. And they're giving that the translation of the loyal shepherd of heaven, and agreeing that this is associated with our modern constellation of Orion. So in McHugh's book, he uses a similar translation. His source or translation says faithful shepherd of the heavens, which is, pretty much the same. But that faithful shepherd of the heavens is, and he's got a source in the book that he puts, is equated with a god called Papsukal. So that's where they get that Sukal from this god Papsukal. So using this idea of the faithful or loyal shepherd figure who's also the anointed one, and I'll move these aside now that I use them, that's how McHugh is getting the association that Orion is the Christ figure in the sky. So then how do we get that he is on water? So if you've seen the other discussion streams or videos, or just if you know, you may remember that from about this area over is the part of the skies that was considered, quote, the sea. We talked about in the earlier discussions that in some sense, all of the skies was considered watery. There's this concept, like he uses terms like mind map or like the ancient worldview, where the skies were the heavens, and that also was a sea of stars, and that sea was a watery place, like the waters above. So all of it is watery, but within that, there's a portion on one side of the Milky Way that is called the sea, and it's the part of the skies that has constellations like this Eridanus River, Aquarius, Pisces, Cetus, the Southern Fish, Capricorn. A lot of water associated constellations are in the sea. So Orion, the constellation, couldn't be perceived to be standing on the edge of the sea. Plus, the constellation Eridanus is a river leading into that sea. So Orion is also standing on water in that aspect of, I have not drawn a line here with them being connected, but in other star atlases you may see that the idea is that Eridanus goes right up to the star Rigel in Orion. Plus, and I've used this sort of like, it's a very light grayish blue here, this to represent the Milky Way. In some myth systems, the Milky Way itself, is sometimes considered milk, or it can symbolize pillars of smoke or fire or light, but often a river. So the Milky Way, in this whole watery sky that has seas and river constellations, the Milky Way itself is also considered a waterway in some mythology and symbolism. So we have the concept of the Christ type figure Orion, and using the other logograms from before, being this Son of God and anointed, and moving, over the sea. So then we get to, I'm just flipping through the book to remember. Okay, so I think I'm not going to read any actual gospel or Bible quotes, but I'll just say that McHugh does put the references for which specific gospels even have the water walking or the sea walking stories. So I believe he's saying Matthew chapter 14, Mark chapter 6, and John also chapter 6. John's chapter 6. So Matthew, Mark, and John, am I reading? Yeah. Sorry, I'm just flipping ahead. Because the one that was not mentioned is Luke, but I'm flipping through quickly to confirm whether it's just part of the story or the whole story that is not in Luke. I think. Well, if I see something else, I'll as I move through. If I remember something else, I'll mention it. But for now, it looks like it's just those three. Matthew, Mark, and John have these. And I should say here, and McHugh is also mentioning this, that there are variations. So the version of what the miracle entails is not the same from one gospel to the other. But McHugh is addressing how, using this constellation writing, he gets to those different variations. So generally the story is that Jesus, he's this Christ figure, and he has disciples, and they're out in the sea. Yeah, I believe in the Gospels, it's ordinarily considered to be the Sea of Galilee. But that would be the real earthly place, not, in the skies. So, there's some kind of a wind that's causing rough seas. And, they're worried that this is going to sink their ship. And then Jesus is seen walking on the water. And in different versions, it may be that he calms the water or he moves the boat or that part is variations. But generally, there's a boat and a man walking on water, and in at least some versions, a mountain. So then, setting that up, Orion, we know, is the water-walking figure, and this is Gemini here. I've drawn Gemini here in this sort of yellowish color as two people, the twin people. But McHugh is mentioning that, and we did talk about this about the previous chapters, that it could also be a mountain with twin peaks. So Gemini could be considered a mountain. McHugh is also making use of Argo. I have not drawn Argo into this picture. Argo would kind of be down here, like below. This is Sirius and Canis Major here, which in some older systems was not a dog, but a bow and arrow. So there would be the bow here, and Sirius would be the arrowhead, and then a line here making the shaft of the arrow. So it would be the bow and arrow, but I've drawn it as the more contemporary dog companion. But the Argo ship would be roughly south or toward the horizon from Canis Major. It would be down here. And can you kind of see it? It's just in pencil, but this is the stern, the compass, the sail, and this is the prow or bow. And Canopus is a bright star down here at the bottom. So that would be kind of in the corner here. And you may remember, but oh, sorry, I have that the other way. These logograms, Ma and Gur, those were also used in the chapter about Noah for the flood boat, or I think this is boat and this is flood. No, I'm sorry. This is flood and this is boat. I think. I'm sorry. Yes, Ma is the boat and Gur is the flood. But here in this chapter, McHugh is saying that from Gur you can also get a reading of Apprentice. And I think in the chapter on Jonah that there was also a reading of like a kind of a spokesperson. So there is wordplay that is involved in getting these readings. And I believe, is it here? Somewhere in the chapter makes use of this new, well, not new, but new to me, logogram Igir, which I believe is associated with the stern, meaning the stern or aft section of the boat. So kind of move these down here, I guess, so you can kind of still see them a little bit. And, and then also introducing, I don't think we used this one before, this logogram Ushum, maybe is how that's pronounced. Associated with Hydra, which I have drawn in this kind of green. Hydra is much larger than this. It goes off the page. So I've only really drawn the head in this particular, scene. But Hydra, this is the logogram they're giving for Ushum for Hydra, but that leads to wordplay or reading of alone. So this is the part where McHugh is talking about when Jesus is praying alone on a mountain leading up to this scene with the disciples on the boat. And I think he also is making use of, here, Taurus. It might not show up so strongly. I have it red on black. And let me just check. Oh, yeah. So Aldebaran, which is the bull's eye. Igi is the Sumerian for eye, but then that's giving a reading of like to, like he's going to the mountain. And then I guess Lum, I'm like Lum, is one way to name Taurus. I don't think it's the only way, because a different one was used for another chapter, but it's one particular way to refer to Taurus. But this Lum also gives the meaning of to pray. So then I think in the story, Jesus he's sort of passing by, or he's going to, or he intends to somehow move past the discipleship. And I think it may be, I'm sorry, I'm going to look at my other set of, I think it might be this one. Now, in the chapter, I don't see the actual logogram shown, but this is one we used from before. So it may be the same one or may not be. But this is where they're getting this, like, passing, what is that phrase? Like ships passing in the night. Oh, okay. So then that was like in one gospel, maybe that was like in Mark was saying that part, but there are the variations, right? So McHugh is saying that in John specifically, there's this idea that the whole boat teleports across the sea. So they're using Ma and Gur again. Oh, and this is where the E gear of the stern also comes in. And that is, because this gives the reading of it happening instantly or immediately. And from Magur, it's this concept of the boat and making landing or the land. So immediately getting to the land they were heading for. And there's another interpretation of this that I hope I will get to mention later. But for now, I'm focusing on what McHugh presents in his interpretation. So he's using the logograms to get the actual text that is used in the gospel scripture. So in John, that's the one where they have the variation where the whole boat that the disciples are on was in the midst of the sea, and then like instantly or suddenly it's on the other side of the sea where they were heading. And and then in Matthew, there's a variation where the character, the apostle or disciple Peter, also walks on water. So McHugh, I believe, is still using the Orion figure. There's not a second figure, like a second constellation figure in his interpretation, but he is saying that there's no card for this, but I think it was called Pop Sukal? He's saying through that Sukal that was used previously, there's a translation where you get Shuba. And I think it goes through depending if it's Akkadian or Sumerian or something, but this shepherd figure can also have this reading of Shuba, and that can also have the meaning of a kind of stone or rock. So Peter's name, whether it was Petros or Kephas or Kephas or Peter, it has, his name means that he's rock or cracky or stone. So the wordplay is McHugh is saying is suggesting that Peter also is the Orion figure, that Peter also is this loyal shepherd, and then in this scene would also be performing the miracle of walking on the water. See, is there something else? Let me just checking. No. So that actually goes to the end of chapter 11. It's not super long. So I'm going to flip the book to chapter 14. And chapter 14 is... Okay, I'm just checking. It looks like I'm still streaming. I'm checking on the second device, so it looks good right so far. I hope we're good as I'm flipping the pages. Chapter 14. Okay, so remember, chapter 14 is called Saint Christopher in the Guise of Orion. So, as far as I know personally, I think that Saint Christopher is one of those saints that's no longer really considered to have been a historical figure. But there are these like vague biographical facts that are told about him. Like, there's one source that McHugh uses that says Christopher was martyred in Lycia, Asia Minor, circa 8, they're saying AD, so our common era, CE 251. And he wasn't originally named Christopher, but he got the name Christopher which means Christ carrier, because he carried or ferried people across the water. And that is considered the patron saint of travelers. The version generally heard in China, Christ carried Jesus, his child, when Jesus age. If he died in, of the common era, that's old. How old would he be? Could he have known this was young, so died in the... So, think that he's not, are other saint category, but the story figure who ferried, including Jesus, some waterway, and then possibly large or even, and then to carry smaller across the water. And I'm just checking because there's something here from another. McHugh is just when I read the excerpt and the other published that Orion did with walking water, saying it could through water as on, but I just want to show you, this is illustration from, and here labels an if that's Elizabeth Hardy, but not all of the look. A figure sort of waves just the arm. And so this is, I hope video looks choppy. Oh, am I? I'm sorry. It looks like I'm still at live, but it's also so I'm a little bit, and I'm not seeing to say if I'm. Oh wait, I may be live. Am I live? Can moving? Are we live? May be live or not. I'm looking like the camera looks like the Wi-Fi's still good. So I don't know if it's bad or my monitoring, but hoping that I'm still, but try stream and then stream. That helps to chapter 14.